Hi, I'm going to show you today one of the longer videos of how I make my goddess bottle sculptures. So here I am at the moment, just starting with quite a large lump of clay, and I'm using a rolling pin and just squeezing the clay around the rolling pin at the moment to start quite a large pinch pot. So I'm taking the rolling pin out and just then putting my thumb inside and rolling the clay around, just pinching out the clay and making the area inside much larger, so starting to shape the main body of the goddess now. The rolling pin can tend to want to go through a little bit too far if you use this rolling method, but it does get quite a nice even roll. Just be careful not to push it too far through the clay. I actually did when I was making this one, so you'll see me patching it up a little bit in a minute. You can see it's getting a bit thin there now. I think I'm looking for a new tool. Yeah, off I go. Okay, so I found one to help me smooth the inside. And then I just work at this for a little while until we're at a place which I'm happy with. You can see the bottom there getting too thin just in the middle, so I'm going to fix that in a minute. So I've spent some time getting the shape right, and now I'm going to address the thin patch on the bottom. So all I'm doing here is adding a piece of clay to patch that up and just making sure it's well attached. Now I'm just using this tool to rock back and forth and create what I call the legs of my goddess. So it's still quite weighty at the bottom, and I'm just smoothing that out to get the shape that I want. So I spent some time just shaping and thinning out the top of my goddess. Now I'm rolling a little coil of clay to attach to the top to create the neck. This clay is quite wet, so I don't need to score or slip it when I'm attaching it, and I'm just using the coiling method, which I always use when I'm doing this kind of work. So I actually twist and smooth down the coil as I go around the pot. This means that you don't use too much clay and end up expanding every time you add a coil. And then just smooth down in a diagonal motion across the join to expel any air in there, and also just to create that smooth finish. Once you've done this, you can pinch it out some more and smooth down where you think you need to. After a lot of shaping and smoothing, now I'm ready to add the arms onto my goddess. So what I've done here is take quite a large coil, and I'm just shaping it into the arm shape that I like, which is usually thicker at one end, which will become the shoulder, and thinner at the other, which will become the hand end of the arm. So you can see I'm just having a look to place where I think it will go, and then I will make another one in the same way. I don't worry too much about measuring clay, I just go with what I think I need, and then I'm just pinching one end to make it thinner whilst keeping the other end thicker for the shoulder. After a fair amount of fiddling and smoothing, now I've got two arms, and I'm just having a look to see where I think I should place them. Sometimes I just use one coil and the shoulder goes all the way across the back, but this time I've got two separate ones. So you can see I've scored both sides. Depending on the consistency of the clay, you might want to add some slip to get a better join. But I think this time the clay was quite wet, so I just scored both sides I'm attaching and then wiggle them together, pressing from the inside as well just to get a really good join. So it's quite crude, but you can see the arms are on there now. The next thing I'm doing now is just smoothing out that coil, which obviously makes it look a lot nicer and also attaches it really well to the main body of the goddess. So like when you add a coil, I'm just smoothing diagonally across to ensure there's no air trapped behind that join, and also just to get a nice clean and strong join. So after a lot of smoothing and fiddling and making sure that the pieces are where I want them to be, you'll see I'm now ready to start shaping the neck. So now I'm happier with where the arms are and that they're joined nicely and they're looking a bit neater. I'm going to take out a section of the clay like a dart in clothing. I've taken out a triangular shape of clay. You can see it there, and I'm doing the same on the other side. I really like doing this because it transforms the piece. So I'm just pinching together to create that new neck shape that I was after, and then again, like when you're adding coils, just smoothing and blending that clay together to make sure that it's one piece of clay which won't then crack when it goes into the kiln and dries. I think it's really important to remember that you can always cut sections out to change the shape of the sculpture or the coil pot that you're making. It really adds a lot more freedom to what you're doing and stops you worrying halfway through that it's getting out of control. You can just take back the control by cutting out a piece and smoothing it together back to one piece. So here I've taken a ball of clay and I'm just pinching it outwards to make a dish shape. This goddess is going to be able to hold a tea light candle or anything else that its final owner wants to put on that little dish. So I'm just going around, turning the clay round and round in my fingers and gently pinching outwards until I get the dish shape that I'm after. So I can turn it over, smooth out sections that are a bit lumpy or have small cracks or anything like that on them, and just get that to the exact shape that I want it to be. And then it's going to be attached onto the outstretched arms of my goddess. Once I'm happy with the shape that I've made, I'm just going to test out that it sits nicely on top of her arms there. Obviously that extra weight will make them want to dip down, so I'm going to put something underneath to prop them up in a minute. So here's the sponge now, I'm putting that in. It happens to be just the right height to hold up those arms whilst I'm attaching this little dish, and also it will stay there whilst it dries a little bit to keep them held up, because they do tend to try to sink down with gravity if you just leave them to dry like that. And I need this dish to be nice and flat so it can hold a candle when it's dry and finished. So here I'm using a Xiam Tools scoring tool just to create nice deep scratches in both sides of the clay that I'm joining together. Here's my slip, which is just wet clay, and I'm dabbing a little bit of that onto both sides of the clay that I'm attaching, just to ensure that they mould together and become one and don't crack as it dries and then as it goes into the firing process. So when joining two pieces of clay, I'm sure you know this, but the best thing to do is give a good push and wiggle to wiggle all those particles together and knit them as closely together as you possibly can to make that final piece as strong as possible. So after lots of tidying around those joins, I'm now adding another coil to my goddess's neck. I just like them to have nice long necks, so again I'm adding a coil and smoothing round the edge. You can see me smoothing, making sure there's no air in there and just getting the join nice and neat. So we always usually skip through a lot of this fiddling, but for the purposes of a longer video, I think it's important to say don't underestimate the amount of small marks and small things you need to do to change how smooth and refined that piece of clay is. You don't want to leave any bumps or tiny cracks. Look at it from different angles, check that you're happy with how it looks, because how it looks now is how it's going to look once it's been fired. The next stage is to take another kind of thick coil of clay and to start to work out how I'm going to make the goddess head, which attaches in effect as the bottle stopper in my sculptures. So that I want the bottom part of this, the piece that goes inside the bottle, to be quite heavy so that the head doesn't wobble around too much in the final piece. So as I test it and I splay out the top section, which will be like the hair or the kind of flower petals, depending on how you look at what the final piece looks like. And again, I'd say don't underestimate the amount of small marks you need to make. So be gentle, but keep going until you get the shape that you want. So I like to use my finger and thumb to press out these petal shapes. So you're seeing it from the back, but what I can see from the front is that the center of the piece, which will be her face, is thicker, and then as it spreads outwards it gets thinner. So when you're pinching clay, it can look like it's cracking a little bit at the edge, so I just run my finger over that. There's no need to use water, that will just make everything really floppy, so I just use my finger to gently smooth out any pieces that need to be smoothed. So I'm looking all around the piece now and just smoothing those areas. At this point I left the sponge propped in overnight and wrapped up the bottle top that I was working on. And you can see now that she's holding up her dish with a lot more strength. It's much firmer, but I wrapped that top piece so it's still quite wet. And I'm just checking that I like the way it's shaped and just refining that a little bit more. Here comes my most favourite tool, and it's just a little shaped bamboo stick, but I absolutely love it. It's got just the right shapes for everything that I need it to do. So I'm using it just on the edges in between my finger marks to create a bit more shape to those petals that I made earlier. Again, just really gently smoothing as I go along and making sure I'm happy with it. Once that's done, it's time to make the holes for the earrings. So I'm using a very small hole bodger just to push and twist and create that hole that will eventually hold the earrings. When you use this, the back can be quite messy, so I just take that messy bit of clay off, and then I'll just use maybe a silicone tool or the hole bodger again just to smooth it out and make sure that it looks neat from both sides. Now we're coming to one of my favourite bits, which is to make the face. So start with a little pinch of clay and smooth it out into a nice round circle, a nice sphere shape. Just pinch that between my fingers. Again, really gently, like small movements initially, just to get that shape. And I always like to bang gently like this, just to get one side to be very flat, and then turning it to get the shape right. Gentle taps and little smooths. Here's the Zyam scorer again. So it's just so good for scoring and doing things quickly. So you can see I've added nice deep scores to both sides of the clay I'm going to join together. There's my slip again, using a brush just to add that wet clay to both sides to act like a glue and to blend those clay particles together to make sure they're really joined well, so that as the piece dries and as it's fired in the kiln, they don't want to break apart. So just a little wiggle, push down and wiggle those together. If you wiggle until it doesn't want to move anymore, you know you've joined it well. Then it takes a bit of cleaning up. This was probably done slightly too wet, so you can see that there's quite a lot of water coming out. I'm just going to use a sponge to clean that up and smooth out the join. This is a Mud Tools refining sponge, which when I first saw it I thought, well, it's just a sponge, you don't need a different sponge, but actually it's been so handy to just get really nice refined joins and just finishing touches on most of my pieces. I use that also for mug handles, joining up those, tidying up those joins too, so I do find it quite useful. Now it's time to add the face details, which is something that really excites me because it's when the piece really starts to come to life. So here's my very nice bamboo tool again, which is good for so many things. So I use it to shape those eyebrows, and then I use the other end to start adding the details. There's the nose. I like just using the minimum necessary marks to create the effect that you want. So rather than going over and over on something, just being confident with the marks that you're making and then accepting the marks that you've made. So if you think, well, that's not quite right, don't immediately rub it out or smooth it out. Just go with it and see what happens, because once something's finished, those marks are what gives it its personality, I think, and it's what gives the piece a part of you. You've made those marks and stick by them. That's your artistic flair coming out. So here I am just making the eyes, using the tool just in a way that I find really pleasing to create the eyes. Now it's time to add the eyes. Again, I think every bit that you do that adds to the face just brings that piece to life, so I find it really exciting. I'm not sure what these tools are called, but they're very common in craft shops and things, but I find them so useful. The little metal tools, they've got silicone on one end and then a little metal ball thing on the other end. They're just really handy, and you can use them for sgraffito as well, which I think they're really good at. So now I'm just adding the nostrils. I really like how the clay pushes up and actually creates that nostril curve when you put the hole in. Here's the mouth. The mouth can be quite important because she looks a bit grumpy there, but I'm just going to add a tiny tick up at the corner, and then hopefully, it's so subtle, but hopefully it will make her look slightly more happy, like she's contemplating something and peaceful, rather than looking a bit grumpy like she did a moment ago. Here's a clay stamp which I made, and it's been bisque fired. I used that to create the little starburst motif on my goddess's heads. And there she is. She's now sitting on the top of the kiln and drying, and just want to say thank you so much if you've watched to this point, and I really hope it's been interesting and useful for you. I'll try to post up another video when she's been through the bisque firing and I do a bit of glazing. Bye.